Hello, and welcome to this special recording, this special webinar for Excelsior Classes. I'm Mrs. Jamie Anderson with Excelsior Classes. I teach both journalism and am the faculty advisor for the student-run newspaper, The Beacon. We are delighted to have with us today a working journalist. Mr. Mark Lenz is someone that I have known for a couple of decades. He spent many years as the editor of the local newspaper here in the county that we both live in. And now he is a journalist working for an insurance provider where they also do fraternal benefits. And so one of the things that he does is he continues to write journalism, but he writes specifically for that organization. So it's very much like our students here at Excelsior Classes when they write for the Beacon. I've told them, Mark, that we are a house organ as the Beacon, reporting on things within Excelsior Classes. And I think that's kind of like what you do in your current job. So I am delighted that Mark is here, and I'll go ahead and welcome him full screen. So it's good to have you here, Mark. And I know you have some remarks to tell the students about journalism because you've been in it for many decades, and they might have some questions as well. So I'm just going to turn it over to you, Mark. Oh, you're muted.
There. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you, but yep, very good. Thanks.
Okay. All right. Let me know if it cuts out again.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I began in journalism in 1981. Right out of school, I started at a weekly newspaper, and I worked there for 5.5 years. And then I worked for daily newspapers for the next 32 years. So I spent a total of 37 years in newspaper work. But I'd always been interested in news long before that. I remember watching the Watergate hearings, in 3rd and 4th grade back in the early 70s. Of course, I read everything that I could get my hands on, things like Time and Newsweek, and I was a paper boy, of course, as well. So. So a lot of time spent reading news, watching news. And now I'm I'm actually doing a lot of research on old news because I work for an insurance society, and one of my jobs is going through what the history of the society was, and so looking back through their old newspaper from 100+ years ago, and it provides a lot of fresh perspectives, and it's been very interesting.
Great. Well, thank you. And I know that the students that are studying journalism today, it's a different world than the world you spent so many decades in, but there are still some commonalities. And I know you had wanted to talk to the students about some of those commonalities. And the first one is the facts, right?
Right, absolutely. I think that that's really the basic job of journalism, is to report the facts, report what you can observe, be accurate, and keep your opinions separate from the news. Make sure that when you do have opinion, it's clearly labeled, and that people understand when they're looking at something that they're basically getting the facts and not necessarily your analysis of it or your spin on it. So I would say that would probably be the first thing, and that's why local news is so important, is because local reporters, whether they're at the school level or at the community level, they actually get a chance to go out and observe things firsthand, talk to the people who are making the news, and so I would say that you want to. I'm sure you've covered before the 5 W's and H.
Yep. Yep, they have, right, students? You've been looking for those. I've asked them to look in local newspapers in their own communities, and there are students across the United States in this class. And so some of them have a good local newspaper, some of them don't. So I've asked them to even, find online sources and try to find those which are in the lead. So we've studied the leads, studied our good old Associated Press style book here. And it's interesting that you mentioned that they need to be observant, because one of their first assignments was to go sit for 30 minutes out somewhere in a coffee shop or a mall and just observe everything that was going on around them with their five senses. And so I think for some of the students, they hadn't been that observant before. And so I'm glad that you mentioned being observant as one of the things a journalist needs.
Yeah. Going back, I think if possible, I'd like to try to talk about three broad things. News objectivity, and that's one of the things about observing and reporting. Maybe getting news from a variety of sources, and then also critical thinking, testing what you hear. And so I wanted to add maybe one little caveat to the five W's in the H. One of those, of course, is why. And that one can be a tricky one. Sometimes we have to recognize the limitations of our understanding and realize that we may not know why. And it can be very difficult to accurately ascertain why something is happening or why somebody does something. At best, a lot of times we just have to rely on their word for it. And sometimes at worst, we go down into conspiracy theories. A lot of times it's just better off to realize that we're not going to have all the answers. The story isn't going to answer all of the questions, and we shouldn't try to guess or go out on a limb trying to answer them all, like why.
Right. That's really good. And if you do, and you're interviewing a source, and this is what the students are working on, is putting it in quotes and attributing it to the source that said it, making sure that they remain neutral outside of the story.
Right. Yeah, that's extremely important. Make sure that, if you use subjective terms, especially that those are identified where they're coming from. An example might be if somebody says, well, that's a lie. You want to be careful to make sure that that's quoted, because there is a legal definition for lying as there is for murder. And just because you might think that it might be a lie, that involves knowing somebody's state of mind. In order to lie, you have to know that what you're saying is false. And so you don't want to just arbitrarily tag somebody as being, as this was a lie, they're telling lies, because you would have to be able to read their mind in order to know that. And as journalists, we can't read people's minds. We don't know what their motivations are.
That's really good. Thanks for bringing that up. I appreciate that. So some other things that you wanted to tell the students?
Well, I think just in the same sense of going out and reporting what you observe and what people tell you, you want to be careful also to remember that there are more than one side to a story. You always hear that term, and it's so true. So if you give somebody space to express one view, be careful to look for another view. The competing side, because again, we don't have the answers, and we want to make sure that we give readers an opportunity to explore some of the other things out there. I just happened to come across an NPR story this morning, which did a really good job of that. They were talking about the debate over masks, for making students wear masks in school all day, and a big subject right now. And rather than just talking to one physician, medical researcher, who said he was in favor of it, they talked to a lot of others with another view. They are against it. And they also talked to some parents who say they're in a kind of a third camp. They're pro-vaccine, but they are anti-masking kids all day long in schools. So there's not only just two viewpoints to a story. There may be multiple viewpoints, and it's very useful to try to give them some extra space.
And I really appreciate that. And along those lines, students being well read. So I think you alluded to this earlier. So make sure that you are reading both sides. And so as a news consumer, don't just consume just one side, but consume both sides. And we talked about that a little bit in our class when I showed them all sides. I'm not sure if you're familiar with all sides, but it evaluates news media, whether it's left, right, or center. And I showed them how they could look at one news article, one news story, and be able to look across the spectrum. And so being well read, both left, right, and center, is a good thing for a journalist.
Oh, absolutely. I don't know if you want to get into some examples that we've seen, but both sides of the spectrum have had some just glaring, horrible failures, in the last couple of years. Mm-hmm. You can look at the, I would say, on one side, there's been, I think some of the controversy that took place over the Kyle Rittenhouse trial, and how readers who read some of those sources on the left, maybe, they didn't get anywhere near the facts that were available. Some of the media were just, they were saying that he was going across state lines with a rifle, which was just factually inaccurate. And so their readers were very surprised when the verdicts were handed down, because they had not received all the information from their sources. I think, then on the other side of the spectrum, we've had some cases that are coming up now where Fox News is being sued, and several other outlets are being sued for saying that the Dominion voting machines had rigged the election, and that they'd been programmed to cheat, and there was really no evidence of that, but they pushed that narrative, and so a number of them have been getting sued now, and some of them are rather hefty lawsuits, billions of dollars, there's been just tremendous number of cases, migrants coming across the river where certain outlets like the New York Times said that they were being whipped with whips, and that turned out to be completely false. Or I think that it's very important to read from, like you said, left, right, center, and you'll see facts on one side that you won't see on the other, and you can test them then.
Mm-hmm. Good. Well, we could probably get into this even more in detail, but I know I just want to let the students have an opportunity to ask questions. Or I think did you have anything else that you wanted to cover that was important for someone who might be thinking about a career in journalism, or exploring a career in journalism?
Oh, I would just say, read everything if you can, and not just journalism or politics, but read, just become more knowledgeable about a variety of subjects. Everything from archery to how to fix cars to how to cook. Everything is important in journalism. We should be covering all facets of life, and so it's important for us to become familiar as much as we can with all different things across the whole spectrum.
Sure, and make sure that you don't neglect your history studies, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So, students, if you have any questions, Mark is here to answer your questions. Maybe anything, the 5 W's and the H. Which is your favorite to ask, and which do you think, if any, is the most important? Thank you, Ethan. Good question. So you want to answer that one, Mark?
I find, I think what is probably the most important of them, but I think for me, how, is just if you're interested in how things work and how things are going to get done, I I really sometimes get the most out of the answers to that one. You want to be very careful not to ask people questions that can be answered with yes or no. And so you want to give them some space to answer you and explain the process. And so how is a great question for that.
Yeah, good. So for those that are viewing this, if you don't know, we're talking about who, what, when, where, why, and how. And in the lead, I mentioned that earlier, for those that don't understand that, that's the very first paragraph of a news story. And so you want to make sure that the who and the what are in there. And if you can get the when and the, what did I say? Who and the what and the where. So those ones you try to get up top, right, Mark?
Right.
Yeah. And then you can spend more time answering why and how deeper into the story. But yeah, when you're talking to people, you want that. So the students in my journalism class are writing their first news article as this is recorded. So guys, do you have any questions that you want to ask someone who has probably done thousands of interviews? Would that be correct, Mark?
I'm sure. Yes. Over the years.
Yeah. So the question that you asked, Ethan, is a good one. Is there a certain way that you might suggest they start talking to someone if they haven't done their interviews yet?
No, I would just, a lot of it is just attitude, recognizing that you're not the expert as a reporter. And the questions that you ask, there's, like they say, there's no such thing as a bad question, a dumb question, except the one that you don't ask. So just being humble. And I think a lot of times journalists become a little bit self-proud. We know all the rules, these other people, they don't know anything. And but I'm always reminded, and especially the older I get, it seems like how much other people know about things that I have absolutely no clue to. And so you just want to talk with them and ask them a lot of questions. Be like the old TV character Columbo. You can just stumble your way around and say, I'm sorry, I just don't get this. I'm kind of slow, but can you just explain this part of it to me? And yeah, if you have a real humble attitude, I think you get a lot further as a journalist and getting the information that you really need.
That's really good. I like that. And then how about when they sit down to write? Do you have any tips for them? Sometimes it's like, where do I go? And how do I start this? How do I do this?
Well, I used to tell my reporters that if you're looking for a lead, that you should pretend that you're just sitting down at the lunch table and you just want to tell people the same way that you would tell them, hey, you won't believe what I just heard, and smooth it out a little bit, but you basically want to get your important facts across right away before anybody has a chance to shoot you down. And so that's there are a variety of different types of leads that will help you to do that better than others. The most important thing, though, is I think to get your notes written down before you forget, before you no longer can explain where that quote came in context in the interview, or so just start writing, and you'll you may go back and revise it several times, but get those thoughts down on paper, get the facts down on paper, and then as you go through that process, you'll usually start to make a lot more sense of what was the who, what, why, where, when, how, and that'll become more obvious for your lead.
Okay. And I've told them to imagine that the reader knows nothing. So you can't take anything for granted that they have some pre-existing knowledge, that you really have to tell them everything.
Right. Yeah. We used to say that we were writing at the newspaper for about a 6th grade level. Yeah, assume that your average reader is going to be reading at that level, and don't don't try to overwhelm them with vocabulary, for example, that they simply won't understand. So, yeah, and of course you do want to at least summarize. If this is an ongoing process, you do want to provide some sort of context, what's happened before, and let them give them a breadcrumb trail to follow so that they're not just completely lost.
Yeah, good. That's really good. I like that. Okay, any other questions? Let's see. Yes, we do have one. Do you have any tips on how to quickly take notes as the person you're interviewing talks?
Yeah, I definitely would recommend doing two things. One is record everything. Ask permission, but usually people won't object, especially if you explain that you're real slow with taking notes and you want to make sure that you get their words down accurately. They'll see, oh yeah, I understand that. I don't want to be misquoted. So they'll usually let you record. And then the other thing that I would recommend is taking some sort of a shorthand class, just learning some abbreviations. I went and got a book when I was in high school, I think, or maybe right out of high school. And I never learned it as a full process, but I learned a lot of abbreviations that I could recognize, and so it speeded up my note taking quite a bit.
Mm. Yeah, and you as the reporter are the only one that has to read it. So you can even create your own shorthand notes,
right,
that as you're writing, what that means. I like to
yeah.
take notes in church when I'm listening to the sermon, and HS is Holy Spirit. On my notes, you'll see that.
Yeah, shortcuts are good. I don't know if one other thing that I would kind of recommend, and this isn't so much for interview technique necessarily, but become real familiar with the basic rules of logic, logical fallacies. This will help you from, pushing viewpoints or things that are just not logically sound. For example, when people attack someone else, that's an ad hominem. They're ignoring the issue, but they're attacking the source, and that's a logical fallacy. I put together a list of about 20 common ones, and I can go ahead and send you that, and you can use it later at your discretion. But there are a lot, from slippery slope arguments to making assumptions about, well, this happened and then this happened, so that must mean this caused that, which isn't necessarily true. Or one that a lot of reporters will come across will be a story. It might be a very emotional story. But you have to be careful, because logically, does it reflect a larger pattern? There's a saying that engineers use a lot, saying that, anecdote is not data. It's not a substitute. You might have one case or maybe even several cases that illustrate something, but in the bigger picture, is that what's really happening? And so there's a lot of fallacies that go along with just relying on that one example, complete data. So yeah, become familiar with logic and logical fallacies.
Okay, that's really good. Yeah, so if you can take a logic class in high school, that would be a good thing to do. So, all right, any other questions? We're going to start wrapping it up now. I'll just leave okay, yeah, we have one here. What was the one thing that made you interested in pursuing this career? Was there a one thing, Mark?
I think I just was able to get my get my foot in the door. I took it in high school, and then I had an opportunity to go work at the weekly newspaper when somebody was on vacation, and then somebody quit their job and they said, "Hey, how would you like to go do this?" And so it was just I felt like divine intervention. I just kind of fell into something that I loved, and it just progressed naturally from there.
And you weren't afraid? God opened a door, you stepped through it, you did that work, and then he opened another door. And so, yeah, I absolutely believe it was divine intervention, Mark.
Yeah, no, it's you only see that with maybe decades of experience to look back at. We don't usually see those things.
Yeah, don't. Yeah, but we can trust God that he is leading us because he's not bound by time. He goes before us, and we know that. Mark and I may have a little more understanding of that with the decades of life that we've had, but I encourage you young people to think about that God is going before you and he knows, and he's preparing you for something. And only he knows it. You just have to be obedient with the time you're given right now. And so I thank you for being in the class. I thank you for being on the newspaper. And Mr. Lenz, thank you for coming and sharing your experience with these students. I think it was very helpful for them.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Good. All right. Well, thank you very much. And I appreciate you being here. And I appreciate those of you that are watching the recording as well.